Hey guys, tonight we travel back almost to millennia. Not to a battlefield or a palace, but to a place far more central to daily Roman life. The public bathhouse. Imagine standing before a structure the size of a modern sports stadium, gleaming. With marble echoing with the roar of 1,000 voices, you're surrounded by the entire cross-section of society. From senators in fine linen to soldiers with scarred arms, all heading in the same direction. The air is thick with the smell of roasting sausages from a nearby stall, the faint aroma of perfumed oils, and something else. The damp, steamy promise of the grandest swimming pool complex you've ever seen. This isn't just about getting clean. It's the social media, the business lounge, and the health club of the ancient world, all rolled into one. You probably won't survive this experience with your modern sensibilities intact. The hygiene standards are, shall we say, a little bit different. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps the channel more than you know. And for a bit of fun, post your city and the current time where you are in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You approach the baths of Caracalla in Rome, a colossal complex that could welcome over 1,600 people at once. The entrance fee is a pittance just 1 quadrans, the smallest Roman coin. So little that even the poorest citizen can afford it. Historians still argue whether this nominal fee was a genuine public service subsidized by the emperor or a clever political tool to keep the sprawling, often restless population of Rome content and distracted. Handing your coin to the attendant, you step from the bright Italian sun into a world of echoing stone and humid air. You've left the noise of the city streets behind, only to exchange it for a different kind of clamor. This is not a hushed, reverent space. It's a hive of activity. The outer courtyards and porticos that ring the main bath building are themselves a destination. You see philosophers in earnest discussion with their students, their robes swaying as they gesture emphatically. See poets trying to recite their latest works over the din, hoping to attract a wealthy patron. It's muscular men, glistening with oil, are practicing wrestling moves in a sandy exercise yard off to one side. Children dart between legs, their high-pitched squeals momentarily piercing the general hum of conversation. There are even libraries here, one for Greek texts and one for Latin, their scrolls tucked neatly into wall niches. But it's hard to imagine anyone getting any serious reading done. The whole place thrums with a vibrant, chaotic energy. You walk past a series of small shops or tabernae built into the perimeter wall of the complex. The smells are overwhelming. One stall is selling simple snacks, bread, cheese, and olives. The next is offering something more substantial, perhaps sausages sizzling over a charcoal brazier. Another vendor sells perfumed oils in small terracotta pots, promising scents of lavender, rose, or exotic spices from the east. It's a first-century food court and shopping mall combined. You might make a mental note to grab a bite on your way out, though the sight of the vendor wiping his greasy hands on his tunic gives you a moment's pause. Maybe not. Let's not joke about getting food poisoning before we've even started the main event. That would be a truly Roman tragedy, though probably not one they'd write a play about. As you move deeper into the complex, heading for the main bath block, the sheer scale of the architecture becomes even more apparent. The ceilings soar 50, 60, even 100 feet above you, supported by massive marble columns. The floors are a breathtaking mosaic of intricate patterns, gods and goddesses, sea creatures, geometric shapes all crafted from tiny, colored stones called tesserae. Sunlight streams through huge arched windows high above, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the thick, warm air. You pass grand statues of emperors and mythical heroes, their marble eyes gazing blankly over the crowds. Feels less like a public pool and more like a cathedral dedicated to the worship of water and leisure. This entire monumental experience, from the art to the architecture, was designed to impress, to awe the citizens of Rome, and remind them of the power and wealth of their empire. It was a statement. Even our public facilities are grander than your kingdom's palaces. And as you stand there, a traveler from another time, you have two admitteds working. Your next stop is the apoditerium, the changing room. If you thought the entrance hall was busy, this is a whole new level of chaotic intimacy. The room is a large, often ornately decorated chamber lined with rows of stone benches. Above the benches are hundreds of small open niches or cubbyholes, carved directly into the wall. This is the Roman locker system. There are no locks, no doors, no security whatsoever. You are expected to place your tunic, your sandals, and your money pouch. If you were foolish enough to bring one into one of these open slots, and simply trust that no one will take it. It's a system built on a strange combination of communal, trust, and wishful thinking. To mitigate the risk, wealthier Romans bring a slave, a capsarius, whose sole job is to guard their master's clothes. You, however, do not have a dedicated clothes-guarding slave. You eye a slightly too nonchalant man loitering near the niches and decide to keep your belongings within sight if at all possible. The air in here is thick with the smell of humanity-damp clothes, sweaty bodies, and the lingering scent of the perfumed oils everyone seems to use. The noise is a constant barrage of slapping sounds as people undress, loud conversations echoing off the tiled surfaces, and the occasional yelp as someone sits on a surprisingly cold stone bench. There is no concept of personal space. Men of all ages and social classes are here, stripping off their clothes with a complete lack of self-consciousness that feels jarring to your modern sensibilities. A portly senator, identifiable by the purple stripe on his folded toga, might be disrobing right next to a lean and wiry courier, his skin tanned from years on the road. This was one of the few places in Rome where social hierarchies were, at least superficially, stripped away along with the clothes. A mainstream historical fact is that the baths were a great social leveler, but this only went so far. Your accent, your physique, and the quality of the slave attending you still spoke volumes about your status. You find a small patch of bench to call your own. As you fold your tunic and place it in a niche, you can't help but feel vulnerable. The stories of bathhouse thieves are legendary. They were a common nuisance, and Roman law even had specific punishments for them. A quirky tidbit is that some recovered curse tablets found in Roman Britain were specifically written to curse thieves who had stolen clothing from the baths at Aquisule's modern-day bath. England victims would write the name of the stolen item, sometimes a suspect's name if known, and then call upon a deity to inflict a gruesome punishment until the items were returned. I have given to the goddess Sulis the 6 silver coins which I have lost. One such tablet reads, "From the person who has stolen them, whether man or woman, whether slave or free." It's a strangely passive-aggressive form of ancient justice. Make a mental note not to anger anyone who might know how to write now undressed. You stand there in nothing but your skin. What next? You see most men are tying a small leather or cloth subligulum, a sort of loincloth, around their waists, though many others walk around completely nude. It seems to be a matter of personal preference. Historians still argue about the exact etiquette of nudity in the baths. Was it universally accepted? Or were there unwritten rules about who should cover up and when? Looking around, it seems like a free-for-all. You decide to go with the flow, forgoing the loincloth to truly embrace the authentic and slightly awkward experience. You are now ready to begin the bathing circuit, a carefully prescribed ritual of heating up and cooling down. Now, your first destination isn't a pool, however, but the exercise yard you glimpsed on your way in. It's time to work up a sweat before you even touch the water. It sounds counterintuitive, like running a marathon before taking a shower. But for the Romans, this was an essential part of the process. You step out of the relative dimness of the changing room and into the brilliant sunshine of the palestra, the open-air exercise yard. The sudden heat on your bare skin is intense, and the ground beneath your feet, a mix of packed earth and sand, is warm. This area is buzzing with a different kind of energy, less conversational and more physical. All around you, men are engaged in a variety of athletic activities, preparing their bodies for the thermal shocks to come. The air smells of dust, sweat, and hot stone. The sounds are of grunts, the thud of bodies hitting the sand, and the sharp smack of a ball being passed. You see a pair of heavily muscled men engaged in a bout of wrestling, their bodies slick, with oil grappling for a hold. Nearby, another man is lifting what look like ancient dumbbells, crude weights made of stone or lead, known as halters. He strains with each repetition, his face a mask of concentration. You wander further into the yard, trying to decide what form of pre-bath exertion appeals to you. There's a group of men playing a popular ball game called Trigon. It involves 3 players standing in a triangle, rapidly throwing and catching multiple hard balls with their bare hands. It looks fast-paced and likely to result in a few broken fingers. You think you'll pass on that one? Another group is playing a game that looks more like modern harpastum, kind of violent rugby where the objective is to keep possession of a small, heavy ball by any means necessary. It's a chaotic scrum of bodies, and you decide to give it a wide berth. A well-known fact is that Roman physicians like Galen actually wrote extensively about the health benefits of specific exercises, prescribing different routines in the palestra for different ailments or fitness goals. Your visit to the gym was also a visit to the doctor's office. You decide on something a bit more solitary and less likely to cause injury. You find an empty spot and begin a series of simple stretches and calisthenics, mimicking some of the other men around you. Lunges, squats, arm circles. The basics haven't changed all that much in 2,000 years. As you exercise, you notice the social dynamics at play. The most athletic and powerful men command the central spaces, their workouts almost a performance. For the spectators who lounge in the shaded porticos surrounding the yard, there are trainers for hire, shouting encouragement or criticism at their clients. There's a subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, competition in the air. Who can lift the heaviest weight? Who has the most defined physique? It's a bit like a modern gym, just with more nudity and a higher chance of being trampled by a rogue rugby player. One of the more peculiar sights is men practicing their gladiatorial moves, not with real weapons, but with wooden swords and roods. Wicker shields against a pales, a tall wooden stake driven into the ground. This is a quirky historical tidbit. Even ordinary citizens, inspired by the games at the Colosseum, would practice these fighting techniques as a form of exercise. It was the ancient world's equivalent of a boxer-size class. After about 20 minutes, you've worked up a decent sweat. Your skin is covered in a fine layer of dust and grime, and you feel thoroughly ready to wash it all off. Historians still debate the primary purpose of this pre-bath exercise. Was it purely for health? A way to open the pores before entering the heated rooms? Or was it more about social display? An opportunity to show off one's physical prowess and status in a very public forum. Looking around at the posing and preening, you suspect it was a healthy dose of both. You've done your duty. You've gotten appropriately dirty, and now you can finally head towards the main event, the water. You leave the bright, dusty chaos of the palestra behind and head indoors, towards the beckoning steam, leaving the sun-baked exercise yard behind. Pass through a grand doorway and into the first of the heated rooms, the tepidarium, the change. An atmosphere is immediate and profound. The air becomes heavy, humid, and pleasantly warm, like a tropical greenhouse. This room is the great antechamber of the bathing ritual, a place to acclimate your body before plunging into the more extreme. Temperatures that await. The soaring ceilings you admired earlier are even more impressive in here. As mist curls around the marble columns and diffuses the light from the high windows, giving the whole space a dreamy, ethereal quality, the noise from the palestra fades, replaced by a lower, more resonant hum of conversations. Voices echo differently in here, softened by the steam. The floor, you notice, is warm beneath your feet, a gentle, pleasant heat that radiates up through your entire body. This is your first encounter with the ingenious Roman heating system, hypocaust, which you'll see more of later. You find a spot on a marble bench along the wall. The stone is warm too, making it a comfortable place to sit and relax. Right. This room is all about leisure and transition. People are lounging, chatting with friends, and generally taking their time. It's the social hub of the indoor baths. Unlike the frantic energy of the changing room or the competitive sweat of the exercise yard, The mood here is languid and relaxed. You see a pair of old friends reclining on a bench, deep in conversation. You see a father patiently explaining the different mosaics on the wall to his young son. The primary purpose of the tepidarium was physiological, to prevent the body from suffering a dangerous shock by moving too quickly between cold and very hot environments. This is a basic health and safety principle that demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of the human body. As your body adjusts, you start to sweat gently, your pores opening up in the moist heat. This is the intended effect. Some bathers would spend a great deal of time in the tepidarium, using it as their main social space. You can see why. It's comfortable, visually stunning, and serves as a central point from which all other rooms are accessible. You might get an oil massage here, a gentler, more relaxing affair than the vigorous scraping you'll endure later. A slave might anoint your skin with scented oil, working it into your muscles as you lie on a warm slab. A quirky tidbit, some of the more luxurious oils were incredibly expensive, showing off a particularly exotic sensei. Cinnamon from Sri Lanka was a subtle way to broadcast your wealth and worldliness. It was ancient aromatherapy and status signaling combined. Oh, this old scent. Just a bit of spikenard from the Himalayas, my dear fellow. The decorations in the tepidarium are often among the most lavish in the entire complex. The mosaics are more intricate, the statues more famous. Historians still argue about the social function of this opulent decoration. Was it simply a display of imperial power and a gift to the people? Or did it serve a more didactic purpose, with scenes from mythology meant to educate or inspire the populace? As you look at a detailed mosaic of Hercules completing his 12 labors, you can see how it might be both. It's a great story to look at while you're sweating. And it also subtly reinforces Roman values of strength, perseverance, and divine favor. After spending a good while here, maybe 20 or 30 minutes, you feel fully acclimated. The gentle sweat has turned into a more profuse one. Your body is ready for the next stage. You give a final glance at the misty, beautiful room, take a deep, warm breath, and head towards the doorway that leads to the intense, fiery heart of the baths, the Caldar. You take a steadying breath and step into the caldarium, the hot room. The transition is like walking into a furnace, a wall of dry, searing heat. Often well over 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit hits you instantly. The air is so thick with steam, it's almost opaque, and visibility drops to just a few feet. The sound is muffled, dominated by the hiss of water being splashed onto hot stones and the groans of your fellow bathers. Yes. This room is much smaller and more functional than the Grand Tepidarium. The focus here is not on leisure, but on a trial by heat. Your gentle perspiration immediately turns into a full-on drenching sweat. Within seconds, you are covered in it. The primary feature of the caldarium is a large tub or pool of very hot water. The alveus at one end, and a basin of cold water, the labrum, at the other for splashing on your face and head. You lower yourself into the hot water of the alveus, which is almost painfully hot. Every muscle in your body seems to scream in protest for a moment before succumbing to the intense, penetrating warmth. You sit on the underwater benches that line the tub, submerged up to your neck. The main activity in here, and the very reason for working up a sweat, is about to happen. You see a man next to you being attended by a slave. The slave is wielding a curious instrument, a strigil. This is a curved metal scraper, usually made of bronze or iron, used to remove dirt, sweat, and dead skin. It is the Roman equivalent of soap and a loofah, and it is a fundamental part of getting clean. A well-known historical fact is that Romans did not use soap for personal hygiene. They used oil and the strigil. They would cover themselves in cheap olive oil, let the heat of the caldarium open their pores, and then scrape it all off, along with the accumulated grime of the day. You have come without a slave, so you have two choices. Hire one of the bathhouse attendants, or attempt the undignified process of strigiling yourself. You decide to try it on your own. You have your own bronze strigil, purchased for a modest price. After slathering your skin with oil, you begin to scrape. It's an awkward process, trying to reach your own back, but the results are immediate and startling. A thick, grayish gunk of oil, sweat, and dirt comes off on the blade of the strigil. It is both disgusting and deeply satisfying. You feel like you're excavating layers of the city from your own skin. This gunk, known as strigmentum, was sometimes collected and sold for medicinal purposes, which is a truly bizarre and quirky historical tidbit. Imagine a physician prescribing a poultice made from the collected sweat and grime of a dozen strangers. It's a testament to the fact that ancient medicine was a very, very different world. All around you, this same ritual is being performed. The air is filled with the scraping sound of metal on skin. It's an intimate, almost clinical process, yet it's happening in a crowded public space. Fathers scrape their sons' backs, friends help each other with hard-to-reach places. Historians still argue about the social implications of the strigil. Was being scraped by another person, especially a social superior or an equal rather than a slave, a sign of great intimacy and friendship? Or was it simply a practical necessity, a mundane act with no more significance than asking someone to pass the salt? Given the Roman context, it was likely a complex mix of both, a gesture that could be loaded with social meaning depending on who was doing the scraping. After you've scraped yourself as clean as you can, you use the large, shallow labrum basin to splash cool water on your face and chest, providing a moment of shocking relief from the oppressive heat. Your skin is tingling and red, but you feel cleaner than you have in your entire life. Now, with your body thoroughly heated and scraped, it's time for the final and most shocking step of the bathing circuit. It's time to face the cold. You emerge from the oppressive, misty heat of the caldarium, your skin flushed and sensitive, every pore wide open. You walk through the now lukewarm tepidarium again, a brief and welcome respite, before heading towards the final stage of your journey, the frigidarium, or cold room. This is often the largest and most architecturally impressive room in the entire complex. A vast, cathedral-like hall containing one or more large, deep pools of unheated water. Think of it as an unheated Olympic-sized swimming pool. The purpose here is to close the pores and invigorate the body through a shocking immersion in cold water. It's the ancient equivalent of a polar bear plunge, and it is not for the faint of heart. The contrast from the intense heat you've just experienced is extreme, and your body braces for the shock. The room is brighter and louder than the heated chambers. The steam is gone, and the light from the high windows reflects off the water's surface, dappling the walls and ceiling. The acoustics are sharp and echoing. And this is where we finally get to the heart of the matter, the noise. The central activity in the frigidarium is quite simply plunging. And people don't just slip quietly into the water. They jump, they dive, they cannonball. Entry into the pool creates a massive splash, a thunderous crack that echoes off the marble surfaces and high vaulted ceiling, followed by the roar of displaced water. Imagine the sound of a bowling ball being dropped from a great height into a bathtub, amplified 100 times over. Now imagine dozens of people doing this one after another. This is the sound of the frigidarium. You watch as a boisterous group of young soldiers, their duties done for the day, take turns running and leaping into the pool. They shout and cheer each other on, competing to see who can make the biggest splash. The resulting waves slosh over the sides of the pool, soaking the mossed floor. The sound is deafening, a percussive assault that makes conversation nearly impossible. And this is precisely why the act of splashing and the noise it created became a subject of social commentary, and implicitly of rules. It wasn't that. There were signs on the wall saying, "No cannonballing." Roman rules were more often unwritten social codes. A mainstream historical fact is that decorum gravitas was a prized Roman virtue, especially among the upper classes. A respected senator would likely enter the water with quiet dignity, while a lower-class laborer or an off-duty soldier might be more exuberant. Your splash was a statement about your social standing and your respect for others. A quirky historical tidbit on this front comes from the poet Martial, who wrote scathingly about a character named Monogenes. Menagens was a social climber who would attend the baths and try to ingratiate himself with the wealthy. But his boorish behavior, including presumably loud splashing and shouting, gave him away as a man of low breeding. The noise you made was a social signal. To splash loudly was to announce yourself as someone who didn't care about the peace and quiet of others, someone lacking in refinement. It was the ancient equivalent of playing loud music on your phone in a public place. Historians still argue about how strictly these social norms were enforced. Was it common for someone to be openly reprimanded for making too much noise? Or was it more a matter of silent judgment and sneering from the more genteel bathers? The answer is likely that it varied greatly depending on the specific bathhouse and the crowd on any given day. In the grand imperial baths, with their diverse clientele, a certain amount of chaos was probably tolerated. In a smaller, more exclusive private bath, the rules of conduct would have been much stricter. Taking a deep breath, you walk to the edge of the pool. You can either be a dignified senator or a rowdy soldier. You choose a middle path, lowering yourself in quickly, but without a giant leap, cold water hitting you like a physical blow, taking your breath away and making every nerve-ending fire at once. The invigoration is instant, shocking, and, once the initial gasp subsides, incredibly refreshing as you float in the cool, bracing water of the frigidarium, the initial shock having worn off. You begin to tune back into the soundscape around you. The thunderous splashes are just one instrument in a chaotic orchestra. To truly understand the overwhelming nature of bathhouse noise, and why anyone would care about a little extra splashing, you need only to listen through the ears of someone who documented it in excruciating detail. That person was Lucius Annaeus Seneca, better known as Seneca the Younger. It's one of Rome's most famous Stoic philosophers, and for a time, his tutor and advisor to the infamous Emperor Nero. In a remarkable twist of fate, Seneca happened to live in an apartment directly above a public bathhouse. In fact, we know because he wrote an entire letter 56 to Lucilius complaining about it. What you are hearing now is the soundtrack to his daily philosophical contemplation. You close your eyes and try to isolate the sounds, just as Seneca did. First, you hear the grunts and groans from the palestra filtering in. The muscular gent, as Seneca calls him, is working out with his lead weights. You hear his strained exhalations as he lifts. It's a sharp hiss of his breath as he holds it, and the final wheezing gasp as he finishes a set. You can almost feel the vibration as he drops the heavy weights onto the floor with a resounding thud. That sound is the bass line of the bathhouse symphony. Layered over that are the sharper, more percussive sounds. Seneca writes about the smack of a masseur's hand on a shoulder, and you hear it now, a rapid-fire series of slaps as an attendant gives a vigorous massage. The sound changing in pitch depending on whether he strikes muscle or bone. It's a surprisingly loud and intimate noise to be broadcast so publicly. Then come the human voices, a cacophony of distinct and irritating characters. Seneca vividly describes the quarrelsome fellow, the thief who's been caught, and the man who loves the sound of his own voice in the bath. You can pick them out. Over by the side of the pool, a heated argument has broken out over a game of chance, their angry shouts echoing. A sudden commotion near the changing rooms signals a guard dragging away a petty thief, the culprit protesting his innocence in a loud, whiny voice. And then there's the singer. There's always a singer. A man with more confidence than talent is booming out a popular tune, his voice echoing magnificently in the resonant space, much to his own delight and everyone else's annoyance. This is a well-established fact. Seneca's letter provides one of the most complete sensory records of daily life in ancient Rome. It is an invaluable historical document for understanding the non-elite, non-military side of the Roman world, and the merchants. The baths were a commercial hub, and the vendors were not quiet. Seneca complains about the hair plucker with his shrill, penetrating shriek, who constantly advertises his services, only keeping quiet when he's making someone else shriek as he plucks their armpit hair. This is a wonderfully quirky tidbit of Roman life. The professional armpit hair plucker Alepolus was a real and seemingly noisy profession. You can hear his sharp cries cutting through the din. Then there are the food vendors, the sausage seller, and the cake men, each with their own distinctive, repetitive calls, hawking their wares to the bathers. It's a wall of sound, an unrelenting assault on the ears. Historians still argue whether Seneca was genuinely tormented by these sounds, as his letter suggests, or if he was using this experience as a philosophical teaching moment, practical. Exercise in stoic indifference, training himself to maintain inner tranquility amidst external chaos. He concludes the letter by claiming he has trained his mind to ignore it all, but the sheer detail of his complaint suggests it got under his skin more than he let on. And now, amidst all this, the grunting, the slapping, the arguing, the singing, the shrieking, and the selling someone else takes a running leap. A huge crack as they hit the water, a roar of displaced water, and a fresh wave of shouting. Now you understand. The splashing wasn't a singular annoyance. It was the final percussive cymbal crash in an already unbearable symphony of noise. After the shocking bliss of the cold plunge, you hoist yourself out of the water, your skin tingling and alive. The cacophony of the frigidarium begins to fade as you find a linen towel, hopefully yours, not the slightly more used one next to it, tanned, begin to dry off. As your body returns to a normal temperature, you start to notice a different kind of activity happening in the quieter corners of this grand hall and in the adjoining rooms and porticos. You've cleansed your body, exercised your muscles, and endured the symphony of Seneca's nightmares. Now you're entering the true heart of the Roman baths, the office, the trading floor, and the political battlefield. This is where the real business of the empire gets done. You wander into one of the many alcoves that line the main hall. You're sheltered from the splashing and shouting. The tone is entirely different. You see two merchants, their bodies still, damp, huddled together in hushed, serious conversation. One gestures emphatically, outlining the shipping routes for his grain cargo from Egypt. The other listens intently, occasionally nodding, calculating his risk and profit. A deal for thousands, of tons of wheat, a deal that could feed a legion or turn a fortune, is being struck right here, next to the swimming pool. It's the ancient world's version of a power lunch, only without the lunch and with significantly less clothing. You see a lawyer explaining a complex inheritance case to his anxious client, using his finger to draw diagrams on the steamy marble wall. There are no desks, no boardrooms, just the shared public space and the relentless pursuit of commerce. Then, you spot a politician. He's easy to identify. He's wearing a brilliantly white toga, the toga candida, which is where we get our word candidate. This is a mainstream historical fact. Aspiring magistrates would bleach their togas with chalk to stand out in a crowd and signify their purity and ambition. He's working the room like a modern-day professional, a fixed practice smile on his face. He claps a soldier on the back, shares a joke with a group of businessmen, and listens with feigned sympathy to an old man's complaint about property taxes. He's not here to relax. He's here to win votes. Following a few steps behind him is a slave with a remarkable skill, a nomenclator. This is a truly quirky and specialized job. The nomenclator's sole purpose was to memorize the names, faces, and important details of thousands of citizens. He would discreetly whisper in the politician's ear, "That's Marcus Fabius. His cousin is a senator, and his uncle imports wine. Ask him about his daughter's recent marriage." This slave was a living, breathing social media database, an essential tool for any ambitious Roman. It's networking on an industrial scale. You see deals of all kinds being made. A builder negotiates a contract for a new villa. A lender quietly agrees to a loan with a young aristocrat who has gambled away his allowance. Even poets and artists are here, trying to secure patronage from the wealthy. It's a complex dance of favor, obligation, and ambition. Historians still argue about the legal standing of these bathhouse agreements. Were verbal contracts made in this informal setting, perhaps without witnesses, considered as binding as a written document, signed and sealed in a proper office? Given the Roman emphasis on personal honor and reputation dignitas, it's likely that for many, a man's word, even one given while half naked and dripping wet, was his bond. To go back on such a deal would be to risk social ruin. you realize that the entire structure of the Roman economy and political system isn't just happening in the Senate House or the Forum. It's happening here, fueled by the social lubricant of shared public leisure. The steam in the air isn't just from the hot water. It's thick with promises, plots, and the quiet, relentless hum of a powerful empire at work. It makes you wonder how many pivotal decisions in history were made by men in towels. All of this socializing, exercising, and deal-making is hungry work. As you finish observing the high-stakes world of bathhouse business, a familiar feeling begins to assert itself: hunger. And just like a modern spa or resort, the Roman baths were more than happy to cater to this need. Now you follow your nose, leaving the main bathing halls and heading back towards the outer porticos and gardens where you first saw the vendors. The air, now that you're paying attention, is rich with the smells of cooking. Remember that sausage seller you passed on the way? He's doing a roaring trade. The sound of sizzling meat and the smell of roasting fennel and garlic are intoxicating. You realize the bathhouse complex is not just a place for hygiene and business, but a full-service entertainment and lifestyle center. You approach one of the many food stalls, or popinae, that are scattered around the complex. They offer a surprising variety of fast food, Roman style. There are simple options like bread with olive oil, hard-boiled eggs, and chunks of cheese. But there are also more elaborate offerings. You see trays of honey cakes, piles of dates and figs, and, most prominently, various kinds of grilled meats and sausages. The vendor calls out to you, holding up a skewer of what he claims is dormouse, a renowned delicacy. You politely decline. It's a well-known fact that Romans had a much broader palate than we do today, and many creatures we'd consider pests were on the menu. The dormouse, fattened in a special terracotta jar called a glorarium, was a particular favorite of the wealthy. You decide to stick with a simple sausage tucked into a piece of flatbread. It's greasy, salty, and utterly delicious after your exertions. Of course, with food comes drink. Wine flows freely in the baths. It's typically served warm and diluted. With water, often spiced with herbs and honey, you see attendants walking through the crowds with large jugs or amphorae, pouring out cups for anyone with a coin to spare. The quality could vary wildly from rough cheap swill for the common folk to finer vintages for the discerning palate, served in more secluded areas. This easy access to food and alcohol contributed to the festive, sometimes raucous, atmosphere of the baths. It was a place to indulge all the senses. However, this convenience came at a significant cost to hygiene. Remember, you're in a hot, damp environment, surrounded by thousands of sweaty, unwashed, or recently washed bodies. People are eating with their hands, which they may or may not have cleaned properly. Food is being prepared in open-air stalls, exposed to dust and flies. It's a veritable paradise for bacteria. This leads to a quirky and rather disgusting tidbit. Archaeologists, excavating the sewers beneath Roman baths, have found undigested food items like olive pits, fruit seeds, and animal bones, proving that people were indeed eating and drinking right there in the bathing areas. They've also found oyster shells and even whole boiled eggs that were presumably dropped or discarded in the pools. So, that refreshing dip you just took, it might have had a few extra ingredients. It's a good thing you didn't swallow any. Water. Historians still debate the Roman understanding of germs and sanitation. They were masters of large-scale public works like aqueducts and sewers, yet the micro-level of hygiene seems to have been completely lost on them. Did they simply have stronger stomachs? Or were they constantly suffering from food poisoning and waterborne illnesses? The evidence suggests the latter was very common. As you finish your snack, you make a conscious effort not to touch your face. You watch a group of friends sharing a bottle of wine, laughing and splashing each other in one of the outdoor pools. And you can't help but see it as a charming, if bacteriologically terrifying, scene. The Roman bathhouse experience was a holistic one, catering to every appetite. But it's a stark reminder that their definition of clean was very different from our own. Having navigated the social, athletic, political, and culinary layers of the bathhouse, you begin to sense that there's another, less savory dimension to this sprawling public space. For all its grandeur and civic pride, the bathhouse was also a place with a distinct underbelly. The very things that made it so popular, the crowds, the anonymity, the easy mixing of social classes, and the general atmosphere of leisure and indulgence also made it a hotspot for activities that were less than respectable. As you wander through the labyrinthine corridors connecting the various rooms, you start to notice the darker corners of this world. Remember your concern about the bathhouse thieves in the Apoditerium? That was just the beginning. Crime was a constant problem. With so many people and so few secure places to store valuables, pickpockets and opportunistic thieves thrived. But it went beyond simple theft. The secluded alcoves and noisy, crowded rooms were perfect locations for planning more serious crimes. Conspiracies could be hatched, illicit deals could be struck, information could be exchanged away from the more watchful eyes of the authorities in the forum. The baths provided a convenient veil of anonymity. You see two men in a dark, steamy corridor, their heads close together, speaking in low, urgent tones. They glance around nervously. Are they discussing a business deal or something far more sinister? It's impossible to tell, and that's precisely the point. Prostitution was also rampant and openly tolerated in many bathhouses. The Roman world had a very different view of sex work compared to the modern era, and it was a regular feature of urban life. Female prostitutes, and sometimes male ones, would solicit clients in the porticos and corridors. It was so common that the Roman satirist Juvenal complained about it. And the word for a brothel, lupena, is linked to the she-wolf, a symbol of aggressive female sexuality. The baths, with their focus on the body and their atmosphere of relaxed inhibitions, were a natural place for this trade to flourish. You see a woman, perhaps more heavily made up than the other bathers, leaning against a column, making eye contact with men as they pass by. Her presence is just another part of the scenery, accepted and largely ignored by most. A mainstream historical fact is that some larger bath complexes even had rooms that could be rented by the hour for just this purpose. Then there is the issue of health. We've already touched on the questionable hygiene of the food service, but the water itself was a major vector for disease. While the Romans were proud of the fresh water supplied by their aqueducts, the pools themselves were not chlorinated or disinfected. The water was changed periodically, but with thousands of people passing through daily, the pools quickly became a warm, soupy breeding ground for all manner of bacteria and parasites. Infections, skin diseases, and gastrointestinal illnesses were likely rampant. A rather grim and quirky tidbit is that medical writers of the period, like Celsus, specifically warned against visiting the baths if you had an open wound, as infection was almost guaranteed. You suddenly feel an itch on your arm and resist the urge to scratch it. Historians still argue about the net health effect of the baths. Did the benefits of cleanliness, exercise, and stress relief outweigh the very real risks of contracting a nasty disease? It was a gamble every Roman took each time they paid their entrance fee. As you look around now, the magnificent building seems a little less glorious. You see the potential dangers lurking behind the beautiful mosaics and grand statues. The bathhouse was a microcosm of Rome itself, majestic and innovative on the surface, but with a dark, complex, and often dangerous reality churning just beneath. Throughout your journey so far, your experience has been overwhelmingly male. You've been surrounded by soldiers, senators, businessmen, and boys. This raises a natural question. Where are all the women? The answer is complex and reflects Roman society's attitudes towards gender. Women absolutely did use the public baths. It was a central part of their social lives as well, but their experience was often different from that of the men. You decide to seek out the women's section to understand this other half of the story in many bath complexes, especially the larger imperial ones like the one you're in. There was a completely separate, smaller wing of baths designated for female use. You find the entrance to this area, which is noticeably less grand than the main male entrance. The architecture is simpler, the scale reduced. It's functional, but it lacks the ostentatious display of power and wealth you saw in the men's section. Other bathhouses, particularly smaller ones, couldn't afford duplicate facilities. In these cases, they operated on a schedule. A common practice, which is a mainstream historical fact, was for the baths to be open to women in the morning and to men from the early afternoon until dusk. The men got the primetime slots after the working day was over. As you step into the women's baths, imaginatively, of course, the atmosphere is immediately different. The sheer volume of noise is lower. There's less of the boisterous shouting and competitive grunting you heard earlier. The sounds are more conversational, a constant hum of chatter and laughter. Women of all ages are here, from young girls with their mothers to elderly matriarchs accompanied by their slaves. Just like the men, they are engaging in the full bathing ritual, gossiping in the tepidarium, being scraped with strigules in the caldarium, and socializing in the frigidarium. For many Roman women, especially those of the upper classes who lived relatively secluded lives, the baths were one of their few opportunities for social interaction outside the home. It was their equivalent of the men's forum, a place to exchange news, arrange marriages, and maintain social networks. You notice subtle differences in the activities. While there might be some light exercise, you don't see the intense wrestling or violent ball games of the men's palestra. Instead, you see more attention paid to beauty treatments. Quirky tidbit from the era is the elaborate and sometimes bizarre cosmetics Roman women used. They would apply face masks made of ingredients like crocodile dung or ass's milk. You see women with white lead paste on their faces to achieve a fashionable pale complexion, and others applying soot to their eyebrows. Slaves are busy at work, not just with strigils, but with tweezers, pots of rouge, and curling tongs, heated over braziers. It's a beauty salon as much as a bathhouse. Historians still argue about whether mixed bathing men and women using the facilities at the same time was ever truly common. Some sources, particularly from the early empire, suggest it did happen and was seen as decadent and morally questionable. Emperors like Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius eventually issued edicts to ban the practice, suggesting it was popular enough to require an official prohibition. The debate continues whether these bans were effective or if mixed bathing continued discreetly in some establishments. As you observe the women's section, you see a world that is both parallel to and distinct from the men's. It's a space for community, for ritual, and for the performance of femininity, just as the other side was for masculinity. It highlights the deeply gendered nature of Roman public life, even in a space designed for everyone, having explored the social, political, and cultural dimensions of the baths. You now take a moment to simply marvel at the place as a physical object. You've felt the warm floors, seen the vast vaulted ceilings, and plunged into pools of hot and cold water. But how did it all work? The sheer scale and complexity of a Roman bathhouse represent one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. You decide to find a less trafficked area, perhaps an exposed service corridor or a quiet corner of the basement level, to appreciate the genius behind the scenes. The heart of the entire operation and the source of the pleasant warmth in the tepidarium and the searing heat in the caldarium is the hypocaust system. This is a famous and defining piece of Roman engineering. Imagine the entire floor of the heated sections of the bathhouse is raised off the ground, supported by hundreds of short, sturdy pillars of brick or stone called pilae. This creates a crawl space, a hollow area about 2 or 3 feet high under the entire floor. You peer into a cross-section, and it looks like a miniature forest of brick columns. This space is then connected to massive wood-fired furnaces, Profernia located outside the main building. Slaves would work around the clock, feeding huge logs into these furnaces, generating immense quantities of hot air and smoke. This superheated air was then channeled directly into the crawl space of the hypocaust. It would circulate freely under the floor, turning the marble or mosaic flooring above into a gigantic radiator. This is why the floors were so pleasantly warm to the touch. But the genius didn't stop there. To heat the walls, the Romans used hollow rectangular tiles called tubuli, which were built directly into the wall structure. These acted like chimneys, drawing the hot air up from the underfloor space and through the walls, effectively wrapping the entire room in a blanket of heat. This is a mainstream historical fact. The hypocaust system allowed the Romans to achieve a level of central heating that wouldn't be seen again on such a large scale until the 19th century. It was incredibly efficient, albeit massively labor-intensive, requiring constant stoking by slaves. Then there's the water. A bath complex like this used millions of gallons of water every single day. This was only possible because of another masterpiece of Roman engineering, the aqueduct. You look out of a high window and see it in the distance, a long, graceful line of arches marching across the countryside, bringing fresh, clean water from springs and rivers miles away. These aqueducts, built on a precise, gentle gradient, use nothing but gravity to transport enormous volumes of water to the city. Once it reached the baths, the water was stored in massive cisterns and then distributed through a complex network. Of lead pipes to the various pools and fountains, a quirky tidbit is that the Romans were aware of the health risks of lead pipes. The architect Vitruvius noted that lead workers often had pale complexions, but lead was simply too cheap and easy to work with to be replaced. Health concerns often took a back seat to practicality. Historians still debate the full extent of the environmental impact of the baths. The constant demand for wood to fuel the furnaces led to significant deforestation in the areas around major cities. Did the Romans understand they were creating long-term environmental problems, or was the immediate need for fuel so great that they simply didn't consider the consequences? Standing here in this marvel of heat and water management, you realize the baths were not just a building. They were the end point of a colossal industrial process, a testament to Roman ambition, ingenuity, and their remarkable ability to bend the natural world to their will. The light outside the high windows begins to fade, shifting from the bright white of midday to the warm, golden hue of late afternoon. The sounds within the bathhouse are changing too. The frantic energy of the lunch hour has subsided, and a slow, steady exodus has begun as citizens head home for dinner. You decide to stay, to linger until the very end of the day, and see what happens when this bustling city within a city finally closes its doors. The experience of the baths at night, you suspect, will be entirely different. As dusk falls, attendants move through the halls lighting oil lamps, which they place in niches along the walls. The flickering light casts long dancing shadows, transforming the familiar spaces. The grand halls, once bright and open, now feel mysterious and vast. The statues seem to loom in the gloom, their marble faces shifting in the unsteady light. The water in the pools turns dark and reflective, mirroring the lamps like a black mirror. The remaining bathers are few, their voices low and their movements slow, as if the approaching night has imposed a sense of calm. The boisterous shouting and splashing of earlier are gone, replaced by a gentle lapping of water and the quiet murmur of the last few conversations. Finally, gong sounds, its deep, resonant tone echoing through the complex. This is the signal for closing time. The last of the visitors collect their things from the changing rooms and depart, their chatter fading as they step out into the Roman night. Then, for the first time since you arrived, there is silence. A profound echoing. Silence that seems amplified by the sheer size of the empty building. The absence of the constant human hum is almost shocking. But the bathhouse does not sleep. As the last customer leaves, a different kind of activity begins. The night shift arrives. This is the domain of the slaves. A small army of them enters. The empty halls, carrying buckets, brooms, and scrapers. Their work is to clean up the monumental mess left by thousands of people and prepare the entire complex for the next day's onslaught. This is a mainstream historical fact. The maintenance and operation of these massive public works depended entirely on a vast and largely invisible workforce of enslaved people. You watch as they begin their work. Some are draining the pools, opening large plugs in the floor to let the now filthy water gush into the sewer system below. Others are scrubbing the scum and grime from the sides of the empty tubs. A team with long-handled brooms sweeps the mosaic floors, collecting dropped items, discarded food, and general refuse. Another group cleans the latrines, a truly thankless task. Their movements are practiced and efficient, performed in near silence. A stark contrast to the chaotic leisure they are cleaning up after. A quirky and rather poignant tidbit is what these slaves might have found. Besides the usual refuse, they would have collected lost personal items, single earrings, coins, hairpins, and perhaps even the occasional cursed tablet that had been dropped. These small, lost objects are tiny ghosts of the people who passed through, each telling a small story. Historians still argue about the lives of these particular slaves. Were they a permanent, specialized staff who took a strange pride in maintaining such a magnificent building? Or was it a dreaded, low-status assignment given as punishment? We have very few records from their perspective, so we are left to imagine. Their reality: a life spent in the damp, echoing darkness, cleaning up the excesses of a society that barely acknowledged their existence. As you stand in the shadows, an unseen observer, the bathhouse feels like a completely different place. It's no longer a palace of public leisure, but a silent, water-stained monument being tended to by ghosts in the flickering lamplight. The sheer scale of the labor required to reset this social stage. Every single night is staggering. You've witnessed a full day and night in the life of a Roman bathhouse at the height of its glory. You've seen it as a social club, a gym, a business center, a restaurant, and a symbol of imperial power. But this golden age could not last forever. Like the empire it served, the institution of public bathing eventually faced a long, slow decline. Standing in the quiet, pre-dawn stillness of the cleaned bathhouse, you can almost feel the future creeping in. A future that has no place for such establishments. The decline was not a single event, but a slow erosion caused by several converging factors. The most significant was the gradual disintegration of the Roman Empire itself, particularly in the West, starting from the 3rd century AD onwards. A mainstream historical fact is that the immense cost and complex logistics required to maintain the baths, the aqueducts, the furnaces, the constant supply of wood and labor became impossible to support as the empire's economy faltered and its political structure fractured. One by one, the aqueducts that supplied the cities with water were cut, either falling into disrepair or being deliberately severed by invading armies like the Goths. Without water, bathhouse is just a large, empty building. You can imagine the dismay of the citizens as the fountains ran dry in the grate. Pools remained empty for the first time in centuries. Another powerful agent of change was the rise of Christianity. Early Christian leaders had a deeply ambivalent and often hostile attitude towards the public baths. They associated them with paganism, nudity, and the perceived moral laxity of Roman society. The baths, with their open displays of the body, casual promiscuity, and dedication to worldly pleasure, were the antithesis of the new Christian values of modesty, asceticism, and focus on the spiritual afterlife. Church fathers like Clement of Alexandria wrote against them, seeing the mingling of bodies in the pools as a source of temptation and sin. You can picture a fiery sermon being delivered in a burgeoning church, warning the congregation to shun the decadent and corrupting influence of the nearby Bachaphus, had a profound effect on public behavior. While bathing for hygiene was still necessary, the idea of spending hours socializing in a state of undress became increasingly taboo. A quirky, though perhaps unsurprising, tidbit is that small, private bathhouses attached to monasteries continued to exist and function, but they were purely for cleansing, stripped of all the social and recreational aspects. The communal, celebratory nature of Roman bathing was gone. Historians still argue about which factor was more decisive in the demise of the baths. Was it the logistical and economic collapse of the Roman state, or the cultural and moral revolution brought about by Christianity? In reality, the two were deeply intertwined. The failing state could no longer support the old way of life, and the new religion offered a different set of priorities that made the old ways seem obsolete and sinful. The great bathhouses were slowly abandoned. Their marble was stripped for other buildings, their roofs collapsed, and their vast halls filled with dirt and rubble. For centuries, they became little more than quarries for pre-cut stone. Their original purpose, forgotten. Your journey through the living, breathing bathhouse is over, and you are left standing in the ghost of what it once was, a silent ruin that speaks of a lost world and the relentless march of time. But even in ruins, the story doesn't completely end. The idea of the public bath, of a place dedicated to wellness, hygiene, and social interaction, was too powerful to vanish forever. The echoes of the Roman thermae have reverberated through the centuries. and you can find traces of their DNA in many places in the modern world. The grand structures themselves may have crumbled, but the concept they embodied has been reborn in different forms, in different cultures, over and over again. Your journey through time is almost at its end, but before you leave, you take a moment to trace these echoes forward. To see the legacy of the world you've just experienced, the most direct descendants are the bathhouses of the Islamic world, the hammams. After the fall of Rome in the West, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire continued the tradition, which was then adopted and adapted by the expanding Islamic caliphates. The hammam follows a similar ritual progression from warm to hot rooms, and it remains a vital center for social life and ritual cleansing in many parts of the Middle East and North Africa. A mainstream historical fact is that the hammam, like the Roman bath, is as much about community as it is about cleanliness. In another thread of history, the spa towns of Europe, from Bath in England to Baden-Baden in Germany, owe their existence to the Romans who first recognized and developed the natural hot springs in those locations. The Victorian-era revival of spa culture, with its grand pump rooms and social promenades, was a conscious imitation of what they imagined Roman leisure to be. Even your local gym or community swimming pool carries a faint echo of the Roman baths. The combination of exercise palestra, swimming frigidarium, perhaps a sauna or steam room caldarium and tepidarium, under a single roof is a direct inheritance from the Roman model. The idea of a public space, where you pay a small fee to improve your body and socialize with your neighbors, is a concept perfected, not invented, by the Romans 2,000 years ago. A quirky modern tidbit is the Japanese sento, a neighborhood public bathhouse that serves a very similar social function, acting as a community hub where people of all ages can relax and connect. The human need for these third places, spaces that are neither home nor work, is universal. And the Romans created one of the most successful and enduring templates for such a space in human history. Historians still argue about the primary legacy of the baths. Was it their architectural and engineering innovation, or was it their social impact? The creation of a truly democratic space where all levels of society could mingle. Perhaps the true legacy is the simple, powerful idea that public health and community well-being are worthy of monumental investment. It's a lesson that remains as relevant today as it was in the age of emperors. Your visit is over. The sights, sounds, and smells of the ancient world begin to recede, leaving you with just the memory of marble and steam now. As our time together comes to a close, let the echoes of that ancient world soften and fade. The clamor of the crowded halls, the thunderous splashing in the cold pool, and the hushed whispers of business deals all begin to dissolve into a gentle, quiet hum. The sharp details of the mosaics and the imposing figures of the statues blur into soft, peaceful images in your mind. All the energy, the chaos, the life of that distant place can now be still. There is nothing more you need to do, nothing more. To see, you are safe and far away from the grime and the noise, resting comfortably in your own quiet space. Let the feeling of the cool water give way to the gentle weight of your own blankets. Let the heat of the caldarium transform into a deep, restful warmth that spreads through your limbs, releasing any tension you might be holding. The journey is complete. The story is told. All that is left is to let your mind drift on the quiet, calm currents of the present moment, floating gently and peacefully towards a deep and untroubled sleep. Just relax and let go.